do you connect to other parts that aren't like physical research? I mean, do you have other supernatural influences?
No, I have nothing. I'm like John Dee. There's nothing. No one talks to me.
The ghosts are ghosting you too.
No one talks to me. I read tarot. I'm pretty good at it, but nothing happens.
The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
Thank you so much, Sergio, for that introduction, and welcome everyone, and welcome Mariana. Buenas tardes, good afternoon. We just indeed wrapped up Montreal, Blue Metropolis. My name is Ingrid Benjamin, as Sergio mentioned, and I'm in charge of the Spanish and Portuguese program at Blue Met. It's a multilingual festival where Mariana was one of the headliners. So Mariana is here in Canada for the very first time. So this is her second event in Toronto. Mariana, how has Canada been treating you so far?
Very nice. Thank you.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your visit in Montreal and your pilgrimage to the tomb of Leonard Cohen?
Well, I'm a very big fan of Leonard Cohen, so I did everything. I did like the two murals, the house, the Portuguese bars that he used to go, the tomb. It was difficult to find the tomb because there's many Cohens, but one said Leonard Cohen and had more stuff, so I thought that this has to be. And then I saw the big, mural in Crescent. So yes, all while listening to him and having a cry. It was a bit insane, but it was very nice.
Wow, well, thank you for sharing that with us. So let's talk a little bit about our share of night, which is the topic of today's conversation. And I'd like to start with the title, Our Share of Night, which is a verse from Emily Dickinson, of course. Can you share a little bit about us, your feelings with Emily's poetry, Dickinson's poetry, and why you chose the title, and just elaborate a little bit on...
Well, it's quite, I read a lot of poetry, especially read poetry when I write long fiction, because short fiction is more focused and it's easy to concentrate, so you can read other stuff, but long fiction you live in this world where you can very easily get lost. So to me what keeps me there is poetry and music, also with short stories, but especially kind of more abstract things to read. And a little before writing this novel, I wrote a biography profile of an Argentinian writer that's called Silvina Ocampo. Silvina was the translator in Spanish, the first one, of Emily Dickinson. So incidentally, I was reading Emily Dickinson's poetry with her translation, because it's kind of difficult for a native Spanish speaker because of the way it is. Sometimes you lose things. And I really like that verse. That is not completely like that. It's our share of night to bear. But the only one that translated it in Spanish, like our share of night, nuestra parte de noche, without of the night, was her. La noche, everybody translated it, added that. So since the novel deals a lot with darkness, but I didn't want darkness in the title because I didn't want darkness in the title. Oscuridad is a very long word. It didn't really capture what I wanted to. It was very obvious, and so I decided because of that. But it was a coincidence of things that I was doing. Mm-hmm. And I also love Emily Dickinson in general, and I quote her a lot in the book.
This is a bit of a side tangent, but you mentioned Maria Negroni, also a writer that you admire, and Maria Negroni also translated or did a prologue with Emily Dickinson, right?
Yeah.
It just came to mind the other day.
Yeah, I don't know. I think she was very early translated in Argentina, so Maria is a bit older than me, but still it's a generation of women that, we had the books of Emily Dickinson available at a very young age, and they were always there. This is the thing about Argentina, that it has like a literary culture that it's very, quite sophisticated. Of course, not for everybody, but you can find almost anything if you're looking for it in Spanish.
Wonderful. And so, and speaking, okay, so you didn't want to have oscuridad or darkness in the title, but your
Yeah.
work very much, I mean, you're very drawn to darkness, and you
Yes.
often say it's because you grew up in the 70s, I mean, in the military dictatorship.
Yeah.
You've talked about it many, many times, but if you could share a little bit with us about how that influences your writing, and particularly this book, The Backdrop of the 70s and the Darkness, and why you're
Yeah.
drawn to horror, to resolve it or articulate it or write about it.
Well, I didn't want darkness in the title basically because the big monster in the novel is called the darkness, just like that. Because I didn't want to put, as you do sometimes in sci-fi or in other genres, like to put very specific names to things. This thing is dark, it comes and it eats you, but I just called it the darkness. So I didn't want it in the title, and I didn't want either to be, sometimes for many people, or I think many people think that this darkness is a metaphor of especially the Argentinian dictatorship, which is not, because the book occurs in the military dictatorship, and in fact the order, there are the mystics, the dark mystics, occult scholars, because they're scholars really, that feed people to this darkness because the darkness eats. They feed prisoners, and this is not subtext, it's text, it's there. This is going on there. What they conjure, that is the darkness, it could be conjured anywhere. It could be conjured in Cambodia, it could in the killing fields era, let's say. It could be conjured in the genocide in Rwanda. It could be conjured in Europe in the 30s and 40s. It's just this possibility, to me, of certain human powers when they collide with the mystic, that kind of are able to raise, because it's to raise something that it's evil, with not that many, characteristics that are typical of horror fiction. It's just very abstract. And I think that came from being born in the dictatorship, the kind of fear and monstrosity that you felt when you were a kid. I was a kid. Was strange, lurking. It was not very obvious. It was, the dictatorship in Argentina was not mass killings in the street. It was clandestine, it was secret, it was denied. It was not a tool of fear used against the people like in other oppressive regimes happens. In other oppressive regimes, you get sometimes the leader saying, yes, you are under a regime that if you dissent, is going to kill you. This was a regime that was saying, no one is disappearing, what are you talking about? It was making people crazy. So that sensation, let's say, there was something behind reality. Reality was presented to you as this, yes, this government, there was a government that was repressive, there was right-wing, that wanted to order the population, to stop the political violence, but you knew, and people knew, that there was a lot of violence behind, and it's not that you couldn't talk about it, it was like, is this real, or isn't it real? Because everybody is denying it. And when someone was telling this to you, it was horrific. Like, for example, many Argentinians maybe are here, and if not Latin Americans are here, or many people can know that it's not from the area, but it's much more, known. That one of the things they did with the prisoners was throw them from planes alive. They were comatose or sleeping sometimes, but they were alive. This was known in the 90s because there was a guy in Spain in the 90s that confessed this in a court. And he did it in Spain to not go to jail in Argentina. In Spain, he was granted amnesty or something like that. But that had been a legend for years. The dictatorship formally ended in '83. So for more than 10 years, people were saying, there are bodies arriving to the shore. You go to the beach, and if you make a hole, you find a bone or you find a person. There is, which is very strange, is that there is literature. There's a short story of Enrique Fogwill that talks about raining bodies, and he didn't know. But there was it was an urban legend, but it wasn't. So the thing, it wasn't at all. It was more horrifying than what was said. Maybe what we thought was, well, maybe they threw some bodies in the river or whatever, but no, there was a plan of, making a shower of bodies. And to think about that later, it was like, what was all that was hidden behind reality? So the novel is a lot like that. The novel is a lot like, this is what was happening also behind reality. Like, there is the dictatorship, everything that we're saying, and also this order that was trying to bring to life this God that is like a full, powerful evil, and he's insane. Insane in the sense that we don't understand their words. We can't communicate with him, or it, let's say. He speaks and we don't understand. Mm-hmm. And that was very much the feeling of growing up in a dictatorship that was very sophisticated in its evil, which I think it's equally traumatic as any dictatorship, but much more difficult to process. Mm-hmm. And in the end, something that I think was part of the plan, easier to deny the facts. Like, people will tell you to this day, I didn't notice anything, and they're not lying.
You can just plead ignorance.
You can plead ignorance, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit then about the order, the cult of black magic and unspeakable violence that is so central to the book, how you came up with creating the order for the book. Yeah, the creative parts.
I was a bit obsessed. I'm a bit obsessed. The thing is that I put it all there, with especially with British magic from the late 19th century. Aleister Crowley, the Golden Dawn. Like, this seems like very foreign to, but it's not really. Like, for example, in the Golden Dawn, one of the members was Bram Stoker, that is the author of Dracula. Like, it's a very important book for me. Another member of the Golden Dawn was William Butler Yeats, the Nobel Prize, poet Nobel Prize of Literature from Ireland. I was a big fan. Aleister Crowley also climbed mountains and famously climbed the Andes. He was a very good friend with Fernando Pessoa, the Portuguese writer. I think Fernando Pessoa even did his astrological, I don't know anything about astrology, but anyway, the thing they do to know the chart, yeah. And other things happen that are too long but are fun. And also Borges knew about him and wanted to introduce him to an Argentinian painter called Jules Solar. That is a very kind of abstract mystic painting. If you've seen the work of a Swedish mystic called Hilma af Klint, it's very similar to her. So that kind of geometric idea of messages from beyond. So it is close, and it appears a lot in local lore and literature and stuff. So I became quite obsessed with that, and then I knew that, for example, things that are very popular, like Paulo Coelho, for example, when Paulo Coelho went to exile, I said this to her because, Brazil, And so Paulo went, when he was in the exile in the dictatorship, he went to, the order is, it's active now, the real one. And he went to London with Caetano Veloso and with Raúl Seixas. And apparently he did a pact there. They don't, it's not a diabolical thing, it's not that. It's a, communion with angels, and of course angels can be evil or no. It's called Goetia, that's called bringing the angels. Anyway, apparently Paulo called one, and the angel said, okay, I give you fame. It was a Faustian pact. I said, what can you give me? I said, I can give you Raúl, my friend. So he became Paulo Coelho, and Raúl Seixas is a legend of Brazilian rock, but he died alone, drunk, etc. So everybody says that Paulo is a witch. There was and there was a sacrifice, and Paulo is a witch, which I believe. And I met Pablo, and Pablo is a witch. Pablo was in the 25-degree heat with a black turtleneck and 5 girls like Charles Manson. The man was not, there was not a sweat, nothing. He was perfect. The girls were like that. It was absolutely weird. The man is a witch. Anyway. I was very obsessed with all this. This even went into the book, and a friend of mine said, what is this thing about? I mean, it's very entertaining, but it doesn't belong here at all. So I wanted to write about that, and I wanted to link it with, there's many myths of orders also in South America, which sounds strange because it's like black magic, especially in Britain. It was, and now we get to this, it was very used by kings, and John Dee was the, this is 16th century, 17th century, was the witch of Queen Elizabeth, and he had a medium that told her basically which countries she should invade, and he was right too. So Alan Moore, the big, the author of From Hell and all these comic books and Watchmen and stuff, says that the British Empire was made with black magic. So this idea of empires and power and politics related to the occult was something that I wanted to do. And that was the most obvious reference. Then there was the brujeria in the south of Chile. It's very long and creepy, and I won't tire you about, but it's awful. And then there was the history of Argentina. And in Argentina, well, now our president talks to dead dogs, but it used to be more serious. And in the 70s, the secretary of Juan Perón was a big spiritualist, had a grade. Her name was Hermano Daniel. And he, did a lot of rituals that involved Eva Perón's body and things like that. So there is a link of the dark spiritual and the dark occult with political power. It's always been there.
And this figure like Rasputin also.
Exactly. Well, is this endless. You can, if you start, like when I started exploring it, you start and it's like, wow, different cultures, and there's always this figure there. And especially when the power is fading, appears, because you can't do anything else in the material world. In the days of Queen Elizabeth, of course, it was very normal. But what was interesting about John Dee, that is something where I took the idea of the medium, is that John Dee was powerless. John Dee was a scholar, John Dee was probably an alchemist, and he was probably a genius, but he didn't have the vibe with the spirits at all. Nobody was talking to him. So it was like, what?
They were ghosting him, literally.
No, and he made this, yes, they were ghosting him like literally. And he made this system of magic that's called Enochian magic, that is an alphabet to talk to the gods. You go to Oxford and they have the No, it's not the original, but they have the text to call to the angels and things like that. And he even got from the King of Spain an obsidian Mexican mirror, black mirror, like the phone, that it's in the British Museum, and you can see it too, where he should, see the reflection of the things, but John Dee was like, nothing. So he gets this medium, that's called Edward Cullen, like the vampire in, Edward Kelly, sorry, but and he called him Cullen. Well, it's long because they shared wives. Well, anyway, but he had it. So John Dee was the power, the queen was the power, and this guy was a bit of a servant. He was the one that had the power to talk to the gods, but he was completely in their service. Mm-hmm. So I got from there that idea of having someone in the service of the powerful, and someone that you can't really trust because he resents you. And also he has a power over you, kind of. Mm-hmm. Like people have too over the powerful. Like people can rebel.
And so in that sense, your research of Silvino Campo, also understanding that world and the more elitist world, or like this world of privilege, was useful as well in composing this part of the novel, right?
Yeah.
And also, like when you're creating this world, beyond the research that you do you connect to other parts that aren't like physical research? I mean, do you have other supernatural influences?
No, I have nothing. I'm like John Dee. There's nothing. No one talks to me.
The ghosts are ghosting you too.
No one talks to me. Mm-hmm. I read tarot. I'm pretty good at it, but nothing happens. The best thing. Nothing happens in the sense, look at how this is so stupid. I mean, I want to, when I do the tarot readings, I want to say things, And you know what I'm good at? I tell people when they're pregnant. Which is kind of sweet, unless they don't want the child. But even if they don't want the child. But
you tell them early enough. So.
And even if they don't want the child, it's like a good thing. It's like life. It's connected to something that is, luminous. So I do it, but I'm very, there's nothing, Blavatsky about it at all. And no, but Silvino Campo and her entourage, when I was, she was dead, but the friends and the houses I went, and all these people, was basically the first time in my life that I saw seriously rich people. I didn't know how it was. I thought rich was different. I didn't know rich was so lazy. For example, like they don't do anything. I remember going to one, doesn't matter who, well, he's dead probably, also because it's a long time, they were all very old. And he had the most, at first I didn't think it was his house because it was next to embassies. So I was calling my editor at that point, Leila Guerriero, and say, it's not here, the house, because there's the embassy of the Czech Republic or something. I said, no, he's there. But he lives in an embassy, no. But it's one of those houses. Anyway, found the person. And he says to me, he was kind of nice, but he says to me, sorry, I can't give you coffee because I don't know how to do it. And I was like, don't you have a coffee machine? And he was like, I don't know. There's someone that does the coffee for me. The man could die. He could have died of hunger in that mansion. if the girl that was helping him was sick like that day. And I didn't dare. I offered myself, in my mind, I'd offer myself, and then I thought, no, I'm not touching anything. What is this, a golden coffee machine or something? How do I pay for this? I don't want anything from these people. So I was sitting like, sipping my water, and it was a very good interview. And this repeated, and it was like they had, money from the land, and they were getting like monthly there, and it was like, this is very boring. And at the same time, they have everything. Many don't even go on vacation because
They couldn't be bothered.
they couldn't be bothered. And I found that very important for the characters in my book, because they are, at one point, they find in this magical thing some excitement, rules, doing something, a purpose. So with that, I chose that kind of money, not money that you have to work for. I know some people have to work for money, but in Latin America they don't, because they have the land, someone else works the land,
They just
and they just get the money.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to write about that, trying to make some purpose in their lives. And I think the Ocampos, for example, found it in literature, in fiction. Mm-hmm. So they make fictions in their lives. And magic is a fiction. Mm-hmm. Magic is producing a reality with words, like a prayer. You pray for something to happen, and it happens, or not.
And let's stay a little bit with the characters now. So Juan and Gaspar,
Yeah.
a father and a son. I mean, with the novel, first would it be the choice of doing it or telling the story through a father and a son? If you want to tell us a little bit about that, had it been a mother and a daughter, would have been a completely different story, right?
Completely different
Yes.
story, especially from outside. It's not like I'm thinking all the time about, or at all, about what people read or in what I write. You can help it, but you do know before you start something that you have to be faithful to what you want. And I wanted a story that was like a classic story. It was a reflection on parenting. There was a reflection of, let's say, classic parenting. There was a reflection on heritage, the classic heritage, the patriarchal heritage, if you will. I wanted a story that was a bit like the pairs in classical literature, like, Ulysses and Telemaco and that kind of thing. I've read, I was fascinated by The Road by Cormac McCarthy. That is like a dying father with leaving a child in a world that is dying, basically. And I wanted to write guys. I didn't want to write about, because I didn't for a second wanted to go into anything that could resemble me and my mother, me and my womb, me and my lack of children, me and my nada. Like, no. I had this pair, and I didn't want it to be like some kind of feminist epic that I didn't want to write. And I wasn't going to write it if there were two women, but it was going to be read like that. And I wanted a male body that was very vulnerable, which is something that you don't see that much. Like the hero is uber capable, and Juan, the protagonist, basically is capable of almost nothing because he's very sick. So I wanted to and he's very central at the same time. So I really want to explore that kind of body that is not your typical powerful male body, but on the contrary, and is still very attractive. It's Heathcliff.
From Wuthering Heights.
It's Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights, yeah. That he's not powerful because of his class, basically. And Juan, in a way, he's not powerful because of his class. He's someone that these powerful people pick to work for them.
But let's stay also with the sexual part of it, which your book is very sexual as well, and the sexuality and the androgyny and that choice. What I wanted to get at is your Gen X perspective on it, meaning the backdrop of blood and AIDS, and how you came into being your formative years, my formative years. Also, we're talking about menopause, which is one of the themes in Mariana's next book, short stories, or story metamorphosis. Again, so Gen Xer theme. If you could bring into that like how that Gen X lens informed the writing.
Well, I grew up in my adolescence, let's say, and early young womanhood was the early 90s, late 80s, but early 90s mostly. Yeah, 95, I was 21 when I published my first book. So those years were of reading. The thing that happened to me those days is, and the reason why I wrote my first novel, is that I couldn't find in my language, in literature, I couldn't find it in other arts, but in my language, in literature, people that were talking about my experience. There was an experience of the pandemic of AIDS, the experience of, in the whole continent and in Argentina, of course, too, of women not having legal abortions. Now, even if we don't have a legal abortion, an abortion can be done with pills. Those days it was only an operation, so I knew girls that died. You don't really know that many girls that died now. And even being illegal, because it's another problem. And it was an experience of, was very punk. It was really no future, and it was very underground, fanzines, feminism. You know, it was like, but it was underground. What was going on with the big writers and the big names, and it was absolutely, I think young people have a lot more influence now in pop culture than they had then. That was a thing that I was thinking the other day, where we were not really taken seriously at all. I have
in fact,
the
I
feeling.
think Gen Xers would probably seen as jaded and Kurt Cobain and just complaining, or like disengaged, you know, and
Yeah.
nothing.
It was very. I was thinking that the other day, and that the good thing about that is there was no, the day we were talking about that the other day, there was no parental control. Nobody cared. So we were there in the streets doing whatever, and I was, and I wanted to write about that. So I think the experience of sexuality with those days was very linked with, was very free. It was a bit more, I guess, a bit more brutal than now, when there is a more consciousness about a lot of things like consent, but it was also more and you know, abuse, and it was not, those lines were very blurred, and you have to learn on your own. But at the same time, I think some things were more free, especially talking about sexuality and everything identitarian, like we didn't call ourselves anything. It was more explorative, I think. And many of our heroes were very androgynous. Kurt Cobain was androgynous. David Bowie was androgynous. PJ Harvey was androgynous. And even in South America, Caetano Veloso is very androgynous. I mean, there was Ney Mato Grosso, all that, you know, was a...
And famously, one Mãe de Santo from Bahia said that Caetano and Betânia are the same person also. And Cortázar said that at the same time they play with that duality, they're the same person.
They are like the magical androgynous in magic, like the man, two, they could be male, Maria Betânia could be male, and Caetano could be a girl. And that was, those were, you know, the heroes. So that, I think that is in my first novel and is in this one too. And it's not forced, because it's kind of how I understand things.
Let's stay a little bit with setting then. Like part of the novel takes place in London and part in the north of Argentina, with which is a very particular setting. And there's also, because we also also mention the land acknowledgement. There's Guarani, which is a language, an indigenous language of South America, features prominently in terms of the language and the culture as well. So if you want to tell us a little bit about the setting, the choice of the setting, and the usage of specifically of Guarani and the more indigenous narratives in the novel.
I chose the northeast part of Argentina, first because I know it. I don't want to use things or places in South America or in my country that are put there to be exotic and wow, this is weird, but no, places I know, and this is a place I know. And it's a place that is it's a bit of a liminal space. It's a border in many ways. It's a border in religion. It's a border because you have Catholicism, but you have also the folklore, pagan rituals and saints that are local of that region, and then you have Afro-Brazilian religion and Christianity on top of everything. And it's liminal in languages, in 3 languages. People speak Portuñol. There is a mix of Portuguese and Spanish. And people speak Guarani, and people speak Spanish. And also and also it's the jungle. So it's very, very hot. And I wanted to put a horror story in a place that had a lot of sun, that was very hot, it was not the great white north at all. But that was not my idea. That was reading Faulkner and stuff like that. So the idea of a place that is in Southern Gothic, the idea of a place that is so damned, so haunted by its past, that I can't really get rid of it. So everything that comes from there, it's an incarnation of that. So every house is haunted, every person is haunted, everything is decadent, everything is punctuated by death and trauma. So that is not the case of that region, but mixing the Southern Gothic idea with this that geographically is very similar, and the idea that the people, an original people lived there that were not exactly exterminated because it was a different thing, but their beliefs were mixed into all this new thing, which makes it very liminal. You don't really know when one thing ends and the other one started. They were not exterminated because they had the luck of Jesuits living there. So they didn't want to kill them, but to make them Christians, which was not the case in the South, where they killed them all. So that place is special. It retains
And you
something.
were familiar with it because you've been...
My mother is from there, my grandmother is from there, my grandfather is from Paraguay. I went there all my childhood, and so I know how it is. I don't really write about, systems of belief that I don't know that much about, because I think it's not it would be very artificial. And this is endless. You can be all your life writing about this.